So Sydney isn't feeling so well, and he decides to call in sick to work. Calls in and he talks with his boss, Joe. Joe, I'm not feeling very well. I'm not going to come in today. Joe says, Sydney, you know what I do when I'm not feeling well? What do you do, Joe? He says, I have sex with my wife, and then I feel a lot better, and I can get on with my day. Sydney says, thanks for the advice. He hangs up the phone. About 2 o'clock later that afternoon, Joe sees Sydney walking into work. Says, hey, Sydney, feeling better? Did my advice work? It did work. Thank you very much, Joe. And by the way, you have a beautiful home. My wife, so paranoid, can't climax unless the door is locked. So I'm like, come on, let me in. This couple's been married for 35 years, right out of high school. And the only thing the husband's ever held back from his wife is a safe. He asks her not to go into it, so she doesn't. One day after 35 years, he says he's going to go fishing, so he goes fishing. She decides, waited long enough, she's going to look in there, so she does. It's back from fishing, she tells him, she says, hey, I went in your safe. I looked in your safe today. And he says, okay, there's $40,000 in there and 3 eggs. He says, yeah. He says, what are the eggs about? Well, every time I'd shag another man's wife, I'd put an egg in there. She said, well, that's not too bad after 35 years. He says, well, maybe, but every time I got a dozen of them, I would sell them, and that's where the money comes from. So this guy, he's an old guy, he's talking with his buddy. Guy's about 83, and how's your new girlfriend? He says, she's pretty nice, I like her. He's 30 years younger than me. She wants to do is suck all day long, every single day. And his friend says, well, what's wrong with that? That sounds perfect. I can't remember where I live. This guy goes to the doctor. He's going for his annual checkup, and he's 60 years old. Doctor says, you passed your checkup with flying colors, Bert. He says, you got the physical health of a 50-year-old. How old was your father when he passed away? My father dead? Who says my father's dead? My father's still alive. He's 86. He says, oh, really? How old was his father when he passed away? You mean my grandfather? Dead? Who says my grandfather's dead? He's alive. He's 102. In fact, he's getting married next week. Grandfather's 102 and he's getting married? He says, yeah. And he says, well, why is he getting married at such an old age? Well, he's under a lot of pressure from his mother. An Englishman, a Scotsman, and an Irishman are walking down the beach, and they see a mermaid. The Englishman says, have you ever been kissed? She says, no. So he kissed her. The Scotsman says, have you ever been fondled? She says, no. So he fondled her. The Irishman says, have you ever been fucked? She said, no. He said, well, you are now. The tide just went out. So this rabbi's walking past the Catholic church, and he sees the priest out there having a cigarette, and he goes, hey, how you doing, Father? Haven't seen you for a while. How you been? He says, I've always wanted to see how you conduct your services. And the priest says, well, that's all right. He says, why don't you come on in and sit down with me? I'm getting ready to do confession. The rabbi says, that sounds great. Let's go. The priest and the rabbi go in there, and they sit in the confessional. First guy comes in, and he says, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned, committed adultery 3 times this week. He says, it's okay, my son. God will forgive you. Put $5 in the kitty and say 5 Hail Marys. Second guy comes in. He says, give me, Father, for I have sinned. I committed adultery 3 times this week. Priest says, it's okay, my son. God will forgive you. Put $5 in the kitty, say 5 Hail Marys. Next thing you know, the phone rings. The priest says, I'm sorry, Rabbi. I got to go. I have an emergency. And the rabbi says, well, it's okay, How you do what you do here. I've got it down pretty well. I'll take care of it for you. He says, okay, well, that's great. Thank you very much, Rabbi. Priest leaves. The rabbi sits there. Another guy comes in. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned, committed adultery 2 this week. The rabbi says, it's okay, my son. God will forgive you. Go out and do it again. We have a special this week. 3 for $5. So these 2 people go to the park, and they always meet on the bench every day. And at 4 o'clock, they both leave, and they walk towards the civic building, public service building. And then the guy says, where do you go when you go into this building? She says, I always go to the 3rd floor. I give blood and I get $30. Says, where do you go? I go to the 5th floor. I give sperm and I get $60. So the next day they both end up on the bench about 3:30. 4 o'clock rolls around. They're walking, they decide to walk to this building together. Walk in the building, they get to the elevator. And he says 3 and she says, an Englishman, a Scotsman, and an Irishman are walking down the beach, and they see a mermaid. The Englishman says, hey, have you ever been kissed? She says, no. So he kissed her. The Scotsman says, have you ever been fondled? She says, no. So he fondled her. The Irishman says, have you ever been fucked? No. You are now, because the tide just went out. My mother used an expression that I always thought was a lie. It didn't make any sense. She would say, I hope you didn't let the cat out of the bag. See, now for me, if I see some guy holding a bag full of cats, the first thing that's going to come to my mind is I want to say, hey, you got to let those cats out of the bag. And I don't know why we're so obsessed with cats. I mean, look what the cat drug in. It's raining cats and dogs. Don't be a copycat. You're such a scaredy cat. There's more than one way to skin a cat. I want to know who's skinning cats. Probably that same guy that's got a bag full of them. My wife, she's so paranoid. She can't climax unless the door is locked. So I'm like, come on, let me in. Let me in. Come on, let me in. Enough is enough. Let me in. Come on, let me in. Let me in. Come on, 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 let me in. I've decided I'm going to go ahead and keep on. I'm going to die ever. Keep on living forever. Is that how it works? What? I don't get to choose? Well, that was a hypothetical? Well, shit.